Meta just committed to buying 6.6 gigawatts of nuclear power. That is enough electricity to run Philadelphia, and all to feed those hungry data centers. And one of the suppliers is a company chaired until recently by Sam Altman, who I guess runs OpenAI in his spare time. Well, Facebook buying nuclear reactors from the ChatGPT guy wasn't on our January bingo card, but here we are nonetheless. So today we're finding out if nuclear power is the trade of 2026 or just the latest hype cycle with a half-life. My name is Guy, and this is Coin Bureau Finance. Before we get into it though, nothing in this video is financial advice. We're breaking down the nuclear power trade thesis and looking at some of the companies who could make or break it. But this is strictly educational content, not a recommendation or endorsement. If you find our videos useful, smash that like button and let's dig in. So then, why is Meta committing billions to nuclear power in the first place? Well, that requires understanding what's been happening to electricity demand. Last year, it grew by 2% in the US. Now that might not sound like much, but it's an historic breakout from a decade of stagnant demand growth. And this growth is expected to accelerate in 2026, with the International Energy Agency now estimating that global electricity demand from data centers and AI could double within 2 years. That's equivalent to adding the entire power consumption of Germany to the grid. The sheer volume isn't the only problem though, it's also the shape of the load. Training runs for large language models operate continuously for weeks or months. You can't pause them when the wind stops blowing or wait until morning when solar production resumes. The computational work either runs at full capacity around the clock, or those billions of dollars worth of GPU clusters sit idle while burning cash and rapidly depreciating in value. The data center boom is so far incompatible with renewable energy, as wind and solar generate when nature permits, not when the data centers demand. Now, if you're wondering why they don't just store electricity from renewable sources for use on tap, a battery system large enough to bridge a 12-hour overnight gap would cost more than the data center itself, and you'd need to build that storage capacity fresh every time you scale up. Previously, big tech was able to claim carbon neutrality while powering servers from the regular grid mix by buying renewable energy credits from distant wind farms. That accounting fiction worked fine when utilities had excess capacity to sell. But now America's grid is maxed out and wheezing. The interconnection queue for new transmission projects stretches years into the future. So now hyperscalers are pivoting to so-called sovereign power, building their own electricity supply because the grid can't deliver what they need when they need it. But this model only works if you can physically build a power plant on site. Solar farms require roughly 10,000 acres per gigawatt of capacity. Most data center sites don't have that kind of real estate. And even if they did, you're back to the storage problem. What's going to power your facility for the 12 hours between sunset and sunrise? Now, nuclear power occupies a fraction of that footprint and operates continuously regardless of the weather. A gigawatt-scale reactor fits on a few hundred acres and runs at constant output 24/7. So, it's this need for dense, always-on generation that can fit next to a data center that's driven hyperscalers to rehabilitate nuclear power, including Meta with this blockbuster 6.6 gigawatt deal. Now, nuclear power comes in two flavors, and they're completely different technologies that happen to share the word nuclear. Fission is what every commercial reactor on Earth uses today. You split a heavy uranium atom, which releases neutrons that split more atoms, sustaining a chain reaction. This generates massive heat that boils water to spin turbines. It also generates long-lived radioactive waste that remains hazardous for millennia and carries meltdown risk if the cooling systems fail, although modern reactor designs have passive safety features that are supposed to make this extremely unlikely. Now, fission currently provides about 10% of global electricity. It works, it's proven, and it's boring, which is exactly what utilities want. Much less boring, though, is nuclear fusion, which is the process that powers the sun, and also Dr. Octopus's villainous ambitions in Spider-Man 2. Anyway, instead of splitting heavy uranium atoms, you smash light hydrogen atoms together to form helium. The energy density is 4 million times greater than coal and 4 times greater than fission. The primary byproduct is inert helium gas, meaning no long-lived waste. And there's zero meltdown risk. If containment fails, the reaction simply stops. The physics won't sustain itself without constant input. Now, the most practical fusion reaction uses 2 hydrogen isotopes, deuterium and tritium. Deuterium is abundant as it's extracted from seawater. Tritium is rarer and radioactive, but it can be bred from lithium inside the reactor itself as a byproduct of the fusion process. This shifts the fuel dependency from uranium, with its geopolitically fraught supply chains, to lithium and seawater. Now, of course, lithium supply chains are their own hot mess, but it's a different dependency map than fission. There's just one problem, though. Nuclear fusion requires heating fuel to over 1 million degrees Celsius. At that temperature, matter exists as plasma, a superheated gas that no solid material can contain. You need magnetic fields to suspend the plasma in a vacuum chamber, or laser pulses to compress fuel pellets for fractions of a second. It's like trying to bottle a star. This is why fusion has been just 30 years away for the last 70 years. The engineering challenge is just not feasible. Until recently, or so we've been told every decade. Well, they're saying this time really could be different, and that's thanks to the Trump administration declaring war on nuclear regulation. The Unleashing American Energy executive orders President Trump issued last May have effectively bulldozed the regulatory framework that has kept the industry under tight control for decades. The centerpiece is a mandate to quadruple US nuclear capacity from roughly 100 gigawatts today to 400 gigawatts by 2050. With the stroke of a pen, nuclear expansion became a national goal, with its demand curve guaranteed by presidential decree. More importantly, the orders direct the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or NRC, to approve new reactor licenses within 18 months. Previously, the licensing process took 5 to 7 years of unpredictable bureaucratic limbo. Projects would bleed cash for years, waiting for approval that might never come. The 18-month clock turns nuclear licensing from a black hole into a defined timeline. The NRC is also being told to undertake a whole-scale revision of its regulations in consultation with Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. So you've got Musk overseeing nuclear deregulation, Sam Altman chairing a reactor company, and Peter Thiel's protege J.D. Vance serving as vice president. Thiel's libertarian move fast and break things philosophy permeates the administration's approach. The executive orders also designate AI data centers as, quote, critical defense facilities, allowing the Department of Energy to invoke the Defense Production Act to fast-track fuel supplies and reactor components. There's even a directive to deploy at least 3 advanced reactors at Department of Energy research facilities or military bases by early July, bypassing standard commercial hurdles entirely through the national security apparatus. In other words, it looks like the Trump put will be in place for nuclear stocks. Regulatory barriers that previously killed projects, like the cost overruns that doomed NuScale's Utah small modular reactor in 2023, for example, are being actively demolished by federal intervention. Now, whether the NRC actually complies with these 18-month deadlines, or whether the courts block the executive orders, remains to be seen. But the policy signal is unmistakable. The Trump administration is betting heavily on nuclear energy, and decades of regulatory precedent are no obstacle for this agenda. And by the way, if you want to stay ahead of these kinds of policy-driven market shifts, We put together a weekly newsletter breaking down the biggest stories in global finance. We've also secured some exclusive finance-related deals for viewers of this channel, and you can find out more using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code. The newsletter is free and the deals are exclusively for our viewers. So then, which company will be the belle of this regulatory demolition ball? The investable universe splits between established industrial giants and highly speculative small caps with deep connections to the Trump administration. We'll start with the latter because that's where the Trump trade thesis is most concentrated. Oklo is the purest expression of Silicon Valley meeting nuclear engineering. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman chaired the company until stepping down last April. He left specifically to remove conflicts of interest, allowing Oklo to work with multiple AI companies rather than just OpenAI. The company went public via Altman's SPAC, and his association remains central to the story. Now, Oklo has designed a microreactor called the Aurora Powerhouse that runs on recycled nuclear waste using liquid metal cooling. The business model is power as a service. Oklo owns and operates the reactors, selling electricity rather than just selling hardware. This theoretically captures higher margins, but requires massive upfront capital. It's pre-revenue with significant cash burn, and Kerrisdale Capital published a short report titled Fission Impossible, arguing that the stock trades on Altman's celebrity rather than engineering fundamentals, which is not too hard to believe. Kerrisdale pointed out that the 2027 deployment timeline is unrealistic, and the NRC denied Oklo's initial 2022 application for lacking sufficient information. Then Meta announced a massive nuclear deal on the 9th of January, including a 1.2 gigawatt commitment to Oklo. Altman stepping down as chair is exactly what allowed this to happen. Without the conflict of interest, Oklo can now sell to Meta, Microsoft, Google, and any other hyperscaler desperate for power. The broader deregulatory push benefits Oklo's strategy of challenging NRC conventions, though whether that's enough to overcome the substantive technical issues the NRC flagged in 2022 remains to be seen. So, this is very much a story stock trading at massive multiples with zero revenue. Either they get NRC approval and deploy, or they don't and, well, the valuation collapses. Next up, nano-nuclear energy is the political legitimacy play. Rick Perry, Trump's former energy secretary and former governor of Texas, chairs their executive advisory board. This grants the company direct channels to the Department of Energy and the White House, which is essentially the entire investment thesis. They're developing 2 reactor designs for military and remote industrial applications, which they're calling Zeus and Odin, and also maintaining a fuel transportation business. The vision is vertical integration across the nuclear supply chain. An impressive vision, but also one impeded by Nano's complete lack of revenue, products, or working prototype. Founder Jay Yu's background is investment banking and capital markets, not nuclear physics, and reports suggest they spend more on marketing than they do research and development. The bet here is that Rick Perry's connections can overcome the absence of engineering substance. It's pure Trump trade exposure, and given Perry's rocky history with Trump, volatility is to be expected. Also in the running, meanwhile, is TAE Technologies, which merged with Trump Media and Technology Group in a $6 billion deal announced late last year. This has somehow turned a meme stock into a nuclear fusion proxy. The company that runs Truth Social is now also building a fusion reactor. Trump's all-cap posts aren't the only fissile material they're dealing with. Now, TAE is taking a different approach to nuclear fusion, using a proprietary technology called field reversed configuration, essentially shooting plasma at itself as opposed to trying to suspend it in a magnetic bottle. They're also targeting a cleaner fuel cycle with hydrogen boron fuel rather than standard deuterium-tritium, which is even harder to achieve. Last year, TAE made a breakthrough with their current machine hitting 70 million degrees Celsius. The results were good enough that they cancelled their planned 6th-generation reactor and are jumping straight to commercial development, aiming to have a functional plant by the early 2030s. The underlying technology appears legitimate, backed by Google and Sumitomo. The corporate structure, though, is comedy, and whether Trump media shareholders signed up for a fusion energy pivot is another question entirely. Now finally, we have a company called ASP Isotopes, another Trump-sponsored small cap, this time something of a picks and shovels play. Advanced nuclear reactors require high-assay, low-enriched uranium. Russia holds a monopoly on commercial production of this stuff. ASP Isotopes uses proprietary aerodynamic separation technology to break that monopoly and supply Western markets. In November 2025, Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. invested in ASP's uranium enrichment subsidiary, Quantum Leap Energy, through a $64 million convertible notes offering. They participated via American Ventures LLC, an investment firm tied to the Trump Tower-based Dominari Holdings. The stock jumped 16% on the announcement. With the US ban on Russian uranium imports fully effective through 2026 to 2028, ASP positions itself as a strategic partner in the anti-Russia supply chain agenda. Not quite as exciting as fusion, but potentially more stable than pre-revenue reactor developers, and now backed by the Trumps. Now, as you've probably noticed, all of these companies are small caps whose value depends in no small part on their proximity to the Trump administration. They look like call options on regulatory reform and technological breakthroughs. So, if you're looking for exposure to the nuclear thesis without the political volatility, the established players are elsewhere. Meme stock-averse investors have found more palatable fusion exposure in two private companies, Commonwealth Fusion Systems and Helion Energy. Commonwealth Fusion Systems, or CFS, is the MIT spin-out that's been methodically ticking off engineering milestones since 2018. Their Spark reactor aims to be the first magnetic confinement fusion device to actually produce more energy than the heating systems consume. If all goes to plan, CFS should be generating their first plasma this year. They've already validated the high-temperature superconducting magnets that make the design viable, achieving record magnetic field strength in 2021. CFS partnered with NVIDIA and Siemens to build a digital twin of the Spark reactor, a simulator that enables them to test thousands of scenarios computationally rather than burning through experimental runs on expensive hardware. The company has raised over $2 billion from investors including Bill Gates, Google, and Temasek. ARC, their first commercial power plant, is stated for the early 2030s. Now, the other credible contender is Helion Energy. Their Polaris machine is already operational, using yet another approach to fusion. Rather than keeping plasma consistently hot and confined, they do so in rapid-fire bursts. They compress plasma with magnetic fields for microseconds at a time and extract the energy directly as electricity rather than boiling water for steam turbines. However, what sets Helion apart is the deal it linked with Microsoft in 2023. This was the first commercial power purchase agreement for fusion power, which Microsoft committed to buying from Helion by 2028. That's a hard deadline with financial penalties if Helion doesn't deliver. Given Microsoft's very real need for electricity to power its data centers and the execution obligations created by this contract, it's safe to say that this is no speculative bet. Helion has raised over $500 million with backing from Sam Altman personally and Peter Thiel's Mithril Capital. Now, the difference between CFS and Helion versus the small caps is execution risk. CFS and Helion are building actual reactors with measurable milestones and no publicly traded stock price to worry about, for that matter. Meanwhile, the small caps are trading on political connections and regulatory tailwinds. Both can work, but they're fundamentally different bets. Now, the obvious risk, particularly for the small caps, is that these reactors never get built. The first small modular reactor to receive approval from the NRC collapsed in 2023 when project costs ballooned from $58 to $89 per megawatt hour. The utilities that were supposed to buy the power just walked away, reminding the industry that regulatory approval is no guarantee of commercial viability. Oklo, NNE, TAE, they're all pre-revenue companies trading on regulatory reform and political connections. If Trump's 18-month NRC approval timeline proves unworkable, or if the courts block the executive orders as regulatory overreach, the wheels will fall off this trade overnight. And while we're on the topic, you might be wondering if there aren't physics risks involved in all of this. Well, as far as we can tell, these are overblown. For one thing, fusion reactors are not going to create black holes. The Large Hadron Collider operates at energies 100,000 times higher than any fusion device, and, well, our planet remains intact. A much closer risk, though, is geopolitical fuel shock. Russia controls around 40% of global uranium enrichment capacity, and Kazakhstan produces around 40% of the world's mined uranium. If either relationship fractures for whatever reason, maybe sanctions, resource nationalism, or a presidential kidnapping, Western nuclear ambitions would hit a wall regardless of how many reactors Trump greenlights. The fuel has to come from somewhere. Building enrichment infrastructure takes decades and billions in capital. The DOE is forking out $2.7 billion in grants to restart domestic capacity, but 2028 is highly optimistic. If uranium demand accelerates faster than supply chains can rebuild, prices spike and reactor economics collapse. So, nuclear power is enjoying a revival driven by the hyperscalers' GPU addiction and Trump's regulatory bulldozer. So, investors trying to profit from this will be choosing between established utilities with operating reactors capturing capacity market premiums today and a cluster of speculative small caps in the orbit of the Trump family. Meanwhile, those private fusion companies are edging towards chasing net energy gain and may IPO in the future, so they might be jotting down that eventuality too. On the fission side, though, companies like Oklo and NNE could theoretically win regulatory approval, have fantastic working technologies, and still crash and burn if the fuel stops flowing. Russia and Kazakhstan control the global supply chain, and rebuilding Western enrichment capacity will take years even with federal subsidies. So the demand is there and the will is there. Now there's just decades of geopolitical polarization to work around before AI's nuclear dreams come true. You know what they say though, no reward without risk, right? Now, uranium may be one of the hottest commodities out there at the moment, but if you want to learn why water is also going to be fought over in the future, then you can check out this video right over here. That's all from me for now though. As always, thank you for watching and I'll see you next time. This is Guy, over and out.